I want to welcome you to our program today, Whales of the World. I'm Becky and I'm a librarian with Hillsborough County. I'm here today with our program presenter, Caitlin. She's an educator with the Florida Aquarium. This time I'm actually going to go ahead and turn things over to Caitlin and let her get started.
Awesome, thanks. Hi everyone, my name's Caitlin. I'm an educator at the Florida Aquarium. A little bit about me. I have a degree in marine biology from the University of Tampa. My focus was on marine mammals, so that's perfect what we're talking about here today. After school, I worked with marine mammals for a little bit, so I got some hands-on experience with some manatees, seals, sea lions, and I also got to work with dolphins, which we will also be talking about a little bit today. So if you ever have any questions about any of that, please feel free to ask. All right, so today we are going to be talking about whales of the world. Again, if you have any questions, please add them in the chat. I'd be more than happy to answer. There are a lot of whales that live in the ocean, so I will try my best to answer all your questions about them. And if not, I can let you know some good resources that you can look that up yourself. But first off, what is a whale? A lot of times it can get a little bit confusing. So whales are going to be mammals, just like every one of us who's watching. So we actually have a few things in common with these animals, which is pretty cool to think about. So we are both going to have either hair or fur. It's pretty obvious with us, we have some nice beautiful hair on our head, but whales and dolphins also have hair, believe it or not. A lot of times on our larger whales, you're gonna see little tiny hairs that are usually sticking out by their mouths or by their flippers. For dolphins, it's a little bit harder, but every single baby dolphin is born with a little mustache. So that's gonna be on the front of their little rostrum area. Shortly after birth, those hairs do fall out, but they are born with one, so it counts as them having hair. We are both also going to be warm-blooded, so that just means we need to keep our body temperatures nice and regulated. So in the winter time, when it gets colder, these animals have some really cool adaptations that we're going to talk about. But when it gets too cold, we need to make sure we're keeping our bodies warm. And when it gets too warm, we need to make sure we cool our bodies off. Whales and humans are both going to give live birth as well as nurse their young. So whales are going to be some pretty great moms. A lot of time, baby whales going to stick around with mom for a few years at a time before they kind of go off on their own. But sometimes their young stick around with them for pretty much their whole entire lives. They're going to stay in that same little social group that they have. The final thing we have in common is we both breathe air with our lungs. So even though these animals spend their whole entire lives in the ocean, they are not going to be a fish. They are mammals like us. They do need to come up to breathe air. A lot of times they can hold their breath for a lot longer than we can, but they still breathe air just like us. Now there are some other animals out there like this one right here. It's called a whale shark. Even though they have whale in their name, they are not going to be a whale. They are strictly a shark or a fish. Some differences we can see between them. If you look really closely at the whale shark on the side, they're going to have these little slits. Those are going to be their gills, so they can breathe under the water. Our whale friends, they do not have that. They have that little blowhole on the top of their head that we'll look at in a little bit. You also look at their tails in the back. Our whales, they're going to move their tails up and down. Sharks are going to move them side to side. So they have a few differences between them. The whale shark is not a whale, but our friend up on the top, he's a minke whale. He's going to be a whale. Now, when we talk about whales in general, it can get a little confusing because there are a lot of whales that live in the ocean. And fun fact, all dolphins are considered to be a whale. So they're going to be included in this group. Fancy word we call them are cetaceans. But usually when we're talking about the really big ones, usually when they're more than 10 feet or so in length, that's the one that when we think of whale, that's typically the one we think of. But in this case, dolphins do count as a whale. So we will talk about them a little bit, but we're mainly going to focus on our larger that we have here. Our scientists, they break them down into two groups. So if you look closely at the picture, you're going to see the bigger whales that are facing the right of the screen. Those are going to be what we call baleen whales. Now, they're called baleen whales because of the way that they feed. So they don't have teeth like a human does, or in this case, dolphins do. They have baleen, so it's going to be these special little hairs that they have. So all those big whales, they have that in common. And then you're going to look at the other side, all the little ones that are that darker blue color or even clear that face the other direction. Those are going to be our toothed whales. So that's going to include our dolphins and our porpoises. So there's typically more of them that are going to be classified together. But this is a great way to get a great look at all of the diversity that this animal has. You can see they come in different shapes, sizes, and fun fact, some of them can even live in freshwater. So I know a lot of people really like that Amazon river dolphin. They have that beautiful pink color to them. They can live in freshwater, and they are considered a whale, which is cool. So if you ever want like a fun fact to share with people, all dolphins are whales, but not all whales are dolphins.
Mm-hmm.
So to get a closer look at that baleen versus the toothed, if we look on our left side of the screen, we're going to see our baleen whale. So those are, again, going to be those a lot larger ones. If you look inside their mouth, you're going to see some of that baleen that's hanging down. With me here, I have baleen. It's a little different than what we see on our screen, but this is a real plate of baleen that came from a minke whale. So they're the smallest baleen whale. And it might be a little hard to see, but there are these little hairs that are going to hang down. So these are going to be the baleen. So this one over time has fallen out a little bit, but they're going to have rows and rows and rows of these baleen, and that's going to be how they catch their food. So they are going to filter feed. So that means they're going to swim with their mouth open, and they're going to get all those little tiny pieces of plankton in there. And then when they close their mouth, they're going to push the water out because they don't want to drink all that ocean water. And then they're going to be able to swallow the smaller shrimp, krill, plankton, all that good stuff. Now, when you look on the right side, you're going to see our toothed whales. So again, dolphin is a great example of a toothed whale. If you look inside their mouth, you're going to see the beautiful rows of teeth that they have. Dolphins, they are only going to have, or toothed whales too, one set of teeth through their whole entire lives. So they're not like us where we have baby teeth, they fall out. They're just going to have one set, but they also are not using their teeth the same way we do. So we use our teeth to help us chew up our food. Dolphins and toothed whales are going to swallow their food in one go. So they're really just using those teeth to grab. They aren't using them to chew, so they don't need to go through as many teeth as we do. Now, there are some other differences between the two of them. It's a little hard to see in this photo, but maybe a little bit later we'll be able to see better. Their blowholes, or what they use on the top of their head to help them breathe, are going to be different. So our baleen whales, they are some really, really big animals. So they are going to have two blowholes right on the top. So it's going to kind of look like our nose, how we have the two nostrils. Our toothed whales, they are only going to have the one opening, so they have one blowhole. Now, baleen whales, they tend to be a little less social than our toothed whales are. We know our dolphins like to hang out in those big groups or pods. It's not uncommon for us to see some big baleen whales kind of swimming on their own. That's normal for a lot of them. And then when we compare their size, for our toothed whales, usually the males are going to be larger than females, and it's going to be reversed for our baleen. A lot of times the females are going to be larger than the males. So our largest animal in the world is a female. Let's see if this video works. Perfect. All right, so this video that I'm going to show you, don't worry about any of the sound for it, but this is going to be a blue whale. And this is going to show us how they feed. So they aren't going to need to hunt or do any echolocation, which we're going to talk about in a second. They just kind of go for it. So as they swim through the water, a lot of times they're going to have these big masses of krill or shrimp. So that's what this whale is finding right now. And they're going to go ahead and they just lunge towards them with their mouth wide open. And then as soon as that whale closes their mouth, they're going to filter all that krill, and then they're going to push out the remaining water again, because they do not want to drink any of that seawater. It does not taste good for them. So they're going to be able to do that to catch their food. Now this whale here is going to be the blue whale, which we will also talk about in a little bit. They are the largest species or type of whale in the whole entire world. And when they are eating, they can eat up to 8,000 pounds of food every single day. So that is a lot of food that they're going after, which is pretty impressive. Perfect. So with our baleen whales, again, they don't really have to hunt. They just kind of swim around. They have plenty of krill, plankton, small things in the water all over the place. Not too hard for them to find a meal. Now, our toothed whales, on the other hand, they have to work for it and they have to hunt. So what you're going to see here is an example of what we call echolocation. So we have our toothed whale here in the front. In the beginning of this, you're going to see that little green beam that comes out. So they're going to send that from their melon, so kind of what we would call their forehead. So they're going to send out a sound signal. It's going to go out and it's going to go through the water. And then once it hits that fish or their prey, it's going to bounce right back. So kind of like if you've ever thrown a boomerang before, you throw it all the way back, but it comes back to you in the end. So that sound is going to come back to them. But something cool, if you look really closely, you're going to see when that red line comes back, that sound beam is going to travel through their lower jaw. So with me, I have a bottlenose dolphin skull. So again, the echolocation, they're sending out the sounds from in their melon on top of their forehead. It's going to send out into the water. And then when that sound comes back, they're going to receive it through their lower jaw. But to help them hear, their lower jaw is going to be hollow. So there is no solid bone on the inside of their jaw. So that's going to help that sound wave travel. And as it goes up, it's eventually going to hit their inner ear so they're able to hear it. So they're going to do that in order to find their prey. But a lot of times they're going to work in groups. So they're not just doing it on their own. There might be some other members in their group or their pod who are going to join them, who are going to help them out, because hunting after a fish is not always easy. That fish can move, they can swim fast, they can hide. So our dolphins are going to do their best. But even if they couldn't see very well in the water, they can still use that echolocation to help them figure out where that fish might be. Sometimes it can get a little tricky if there's a lot of other sounds going on, there's a lot of objects around them. That sound's going to be bouncing off all over the place. But for the most part, they're going to rely on that echolocation in order to hunt for their food. Most of the time, it's going to be fish, squid, octopus, shrimp, things that are harder to catch than are those little tiny krills that are in the water. Now, another adaptation or special thing that these animals need to have is they need to be ordered to dive. And a lot of them can dive really deep. So we found this really cool graphic that shows us some of the whales that can dive the deepest. The one that so far on the record has been able to make the deepest dive is our Cuvier's beaked whale. They found that that whale almost dived 9,000 feet, which is very impressive. And they held that breath for pretty much 3 hours. So for a human, maybe you're swimming in your pool, you're going underwater, you hold it for maybe a minute or two. I'm not very good at holding my breath. There's some people who can hold it a little bit longer, but no human has been able to cross that 60-minute line. I think the human who held it the longest was like 20 minutes. That's an extreme case. So these animals are able to dive deep, and that's a really cool thing that they're able to do, because for a mammal or an animal that needs to breathe air, being able to hold it for that long is pretty impressive. But they do have some things that are going to help them do that. Now this other picture over here is going to be of a sperm whale. They are also famous for diving deep. But something cool to note about this is this photo was taken with an ROV or an underwater camera. So they are diving at depths that are so deep that humans can't even go there in the first place. So it's possible that there are some whales that dive a lot deeper, but we are not able to go there ourselves. So we just haven't been able to discover it yet. So it's kind of cool to think about that one day we could find a whale that has dove even deeper or has stayed underwater even longer than some of the ones that we already know about. And in order to help them do those dives, they do have some special adaptations. Now, one thing that they can do is they can slow their heart rate down. So that's going to have less blood flowing through. So it's going to be a little bit of less work for them in order to hold their breath. And they're also able to shut off where their blood supply is going in their body, so they can just purely focus it on areas that are being used to dive. So they can kind of focus on keeping their heart going, they focus on their lungs as well as their brain. But any other organ that they don't need to be using at that moment, they can kind of shut it off. So that's kind of cool. We are not able to do that, but they can. And then they also have some special proteins in their muscles that can store extra oxygen. So they're able to build that up in their muscles. So as they dive down deeper, they can rely on those. Now, our next thing, when we look at these animals, they look a lot different than we do. So there are some pretty cool parts that they have. First thing I mentioned earlier is going to be their blowhole. So that one is going to be for a baleen whale. So you can see how it looks exactly like our nostrils. They have those two openings. Again, because they're larger animals, they need to be taking in more oxygen. So they have two. Our toothed whales, they just have the one. but that blowhole is always going to be on the top of their head. If you think about it, these animals are spending a lot of time in the water. It's a lot of work for them to stick their whole entire head out. So if they could just stick the top of their head out of the water, they can breathe, they can go back down. It's a lot less work. It's kind of like how when we're snorkeling, we're faces down, but we have our snorkel on the top. So their blowhole is always going to be right up top. Now our next part we're going to look at are going to be their flippers. Now a lot of times these get confused with fins. Sometimes people use them interchangeably or for the same thing, but they are going to be a little bit different. When we talk about fish, think like Nemo and Dory, they have fins. If you were to take that fin, you took an x-ray, there's going to be no bones inside of it at all. Now with our flippers, like our whale here, they do have bones inside of it. So if you were to take an x-ray of their flipper, you would see a little hand. So they are going to have 5 digits just like we do. They got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. This one is for a bottlenose dolphin again. So if we were to have a humpback whale like the one in this picture, it would be much, much larger. But they are going to have bones inside of their flippers. So that is going to make it a flipper and not a fin. But if you think about it, when we swim through the water and we move with our hands, it's not the easiest or it's not the most streamlined, so it doesn't make swimming nice and smooth. So they have those flippers that'll cover the bones over there, so it makes it a lot easier and less work for them to swim. You can kind of think how like ducks have webbed feet. It's going to make it easier for them to swim in the water. So over time, they have grown so that they don't have digits like we do. They just have that flipper that covers it. And the final thing I like to point out is their fluke or their tail. So their tail is going to be kind of the powerhouse of their whole body. That's going to be what propels them forward. So they are doing all the propulsion with that tail in the back, and then those flippers are just going to help them steer. And the cool thing about their tail is that's how a lot of scientists are able to identify them out in the wild. We can keep track of how many there are. A lot of times scientists will give them numbers and take photos of them so that they can study them over the years. So every whale has their own unique tail fluke. So if you look kind of towards the top of them, you're going to see like little different nicks and notches in them or different markings. All dolphins are going to have different ones, or whales too. So just like we all have our own unique fingerprint, all these animals have their own unique tail flukes. So they all have different kind of prints that we can help keep track of them. And then if you want to learn a really fun new word, the area where those tail flukes kind of meets the rest of their tail is called a peduncle. It's just really fun to say. So if you want to learn a new word, whales have a peduncle. So now I'm going to go into a little bit of the different species of whales that we have. I'm going to focus mainly on the larger whales again, and ones that are a little bit more popular. So we're going to start off with my personal favorite whale in the whole entire world. We have our beluga whale. So they are sometimes known as like the ghost of the sea. They're also known as the canary of the sea because of how vocal or how many sounds they make. So if you're ever on YouTube or you're looking up videos, if you look up the sounds that they can make a whole different array of sounds. Now what's going to help them make that sound is going to be that nice big melon or forehead that they have. All toothed whales have that, but the belugas is very prominent and also makes them look very squishy. So that melon is just a big oil-filled area, so it is actually squishy to begin with, but they're going to use that to help them amplify sounds. And then as they move their melon around and they move their blowhole around, it's going to create all the different sounds that they make. So all these whales, their sounds are going to come out of either their blowhole or from their lungs, but it is not ever going to come out of their mouth. So if you're ever watching a cartoon and a dolphin opens their mouth and the sound comes out, it's not completely true. All the sound is coming from their blowhole, doesn't come out of their mouth. It's kind of the same with how they breathe. They don't breathe out of their mouth, they only do it out of their blowhole. Now our beluga whales, they are going to live in the Arctic. So if you look at that map, we are looking kind of at the top of the globe down. So you're going to commonly see these over in Alaska for the United States. They can be found in the Arctic of Russia, over by Greenland. At least here in the US, you're going to see these whales over in Alaska. And they are going to be on the smaller side compared to whales. So they're usually like 15 feet in length if they're full grown, but they are going to be toothed whales. So they do have teeth inside their mouth. And then since they live in the Arctic and it can get very cold there, they are going to want to make sure they can stay nice and warm. So they aren't like us where they're just going to put on a jacket, call it a day. They have kind of a built-in jacket in a sense. So they have blubber, which we mentioned a little bit earlier. So all of these whales are going to have blubber, but depending on the environments that they live in, it's going to either be thick or thin. They're going to be in the warm. They don't need a lot of blubber. But if they're going to be in the Arctic, like our beluga, they are going to want to stay nice and warm. So you can see that beluga in the photo. He's got a pretty big layer of blubber there. So it's going to be in between their muscle and their skin, and that's going to help keep them warm, because remember, these are warm-blooded animals. They can't survive in the freezing cold. They need to make sure that their bodies are staying nice and warm. We go to our next whale. We have our narwhal. A lot of people get really excited about our narwhals. One, because sometimes people think these are just made up animals. They are literally a whale with a giant unicorn horn on their head. So a lot of times people just think they are made up, but they are real animals. Similar to our beluga, they're going to be found up in the Arctic. They have a little bit of a smaller range, so they're going to be more up towards like Canada and Greenland. So again, that map is kind of looking at the top of the globe down. But the most distinct thing about our narwhal is going to be that tusk that comes out the top of their head. So it is technically not a horn. They're going to be made out of a different material. So this is a tusk, and tusks are made out of the same material as our teeth. So this narwhal or this whale has a giant tooth that is just sticking out of its head. So most of the time, it's going to be the male narwhal that has that. On occasion, a female can have one. But if we were to look inside of our narwhal skull, they're going to have 2 canine teeth. One of them is going to grow into that long tusk, and the other one just kind of stays inside. It doesn't really grow too much. But besides that, they really don't have any other teeth inside of their mouth. They are going to be swallowing that food whole most of the time again. So scientists kind of question why they don't have any teeth. We're still learning more about that today. But they are going to have that tusk. And they're also still unsure why they have the tusk in the first place. If you look in that photo, there is a little tiny fish that's right on the top of their tusk. For a long time, it was believed that they used it for hunting. But as they studied them more, they realized that it wasn't really the best thing for them to use in order to get a fish. They can use it on occasion, but that's not what they mainly use it for. As they studied the tusk closer, they realized there were a lot of nerves on the tusk. So that tusk is really good at sensing the environment around it. So they think that the tusk is used to sense difference in water pressure, and how salty the water is, and how cold it is. Or they think it might just be used for males in order to compete with other males to impress females. But there is no set answer to it. So it's kind of cool to think about how maybe one day, if you want to study these animals, you can figure out why a narwhal has a tusk. This one is going to be another famous one. So this is our orca. Sometimes this animal goes by another name. You may have heard killer whale before. Now, orcas are going to be classified as the largest dolphin in the world. So they are more closely related to our bottlenose dolphins that we see a lot here in Tampa. And they are found all over the world. So if you look at that map, wherever that blue is where our orcas can be found. So they are really good at adapting to different environments. But they also have different, we call them ecotypes. So the orcas that live up in Alaska are going to act a little bit differently than the orcas that live over by South America, by Africa. And they also all have different specialized diets, which is kind of cool. And our orcas are going to be an apex predator. So that means they are at the top of the food chain. They pretty much rule the ocean. They're going to be right at the top. Orcas, they found them eating animals like salmon, so just a fish. Some of them will hunt after stingrays. Some will eat sharks. And they even found some orcas can eat blue whale, which is the largest animal out there in the ocean. So if you look at the bottom picture, you're going to see there's a lot of those whales that are all together. That's because they're going to hunt in groups. So they are going to work together so that they can help get their food. So it's going to be a team effort. This photo we have here, you can see there are 4 orcas that are working together. This one's probably going to be down in the Antarctic. And you're going to see that they are swimming together to create a large wave and hope that that wave is going to move over that iceberg and knock over that seal, and then they can share that for a meal. So these are some really smart animals. They have all different hunting tactics that they use in order to catch their prey, and they work really well together, which is cool. Our next whale is going to be our humpback whale. These ones are very famous for singing. So they have these long, loud, we call them songs, or the sounds that they make. And these are also very famous for doing what we call breaching. So if you look at that photo, you can kind of see how it's jumping out of the water. If you ever go whale watching in Hawaii or even Alaska, depending on the time of year, you get a chance where you can see the humpback whale breaching out of the water. It's really cool to see in person. And I think they do that to help communicate with each other. Big splash, big sound. It's going to grab attention of other whales. Again, this is going to be another whale that is kind of all over the world. So they are famous for migrating, which means they move based on the season. So when it is nice and warm, they're going to be more in the tropical areas. It's usually the time of year that they're going to be breeding. So that's going to be in the winter time. They're going to go to the warm. And then when it starts to get warm, they go to the colder regions. So think Alaska, and that's going to be where they're getting most of their food. So summertime in Alaska is a really good time for them to get a lot of food in them. But from Alaska to Hawaii, they can travel about 3,000 miles, and sometimes they do it in a span of 28 days. So that's a lot of traveling that these whales do. If you look really closely at our humpback whales, you can see they are a baleen whale, so you can see those baleen plates in their mouth. And you also, if you look on the kind of bottom side, you'll see these little like black knobs that they have. So even though it's a big knob on their face, it's just a single hair follicle. So there's just one hair inside that big knob. So like we said earlier, they're mammals, they have hair. So that's going to be where the humpback's hairs are located. And if you look on the top, you're going to see like these little white circles. Those are going to be barnacles. So barnacles are a living animal. Now they have a special relationship with these barnacles. Science world, we call it commensalism. So they are working together. So the barnacles, they're getting a free ride out of the whale. When the whale's moving through the water, these barnacles are also filter feeding as they move along. For our humpback whale, it doesn't really do anything for them, but it also doesn't harm them. So they are going to be a form of a symbiotic relationship, or a relationship where one animal is going to benefit, and then our whale just doesn't really bother him too much. Next one is going to be our sperm whale. As you can see, we are getting a little bit larger. So these whales, their head is about 1/3 of their whole entire body. So they have a gigantic head in the front. If you look again, they're kind of all over the world. They are also going to be one that migrates. So sperm whales do travel through Florida. Probably not going to see them here in Tampa Bay, or a little too shallow for them. These whales love the deep waters. So they're going to be one of our deeper divers. The photo we have here are going to be some sperm whales that are deciding to take a nap together. So for some reason, they like to lay vertically, and that's how they're going to sleep. They think that they do it so they can get air very quickly. They're pretty close to the surface if they're laying that way, because they aren't like us where they just automatically breathe while they sleep. Their brain has to tell them when they breathe, and they have to breathe air. So they only sleep for about 10 to 15 minutes at a time before they come up for another breath. And they're always somewhat alert of what's going on. So they don't go into a deep sleep like we do. They shut off about half their brain, half of it sleeps, the other half stays awake, and then they can switch off between the two. But since these whales like to dive deep, they found that one of the main food sources they eat is giant squid. So this is not a real photo. Again, humans can't go down that deep, and a lot of times we don't have the cameras or technology to do that. So we have never been able to catch this on camera, but from sperm whales that come up and they have scars on their face or marks from fighting with a giant squid. So they found that one of the main food sources for them is going to be giant squid. They've also found the contents of squid that doesn't break down in their stomach, like the giant squid beak. doesn't break down. So inside their stomach contents, they have found their beaks before, which is pretty cool. So this is a display over in the Museum of Natural History over in New York City. But this just depicts what it would look like. So there are animals that can eat giant squid, which is pretty cool. They believe they put up a good fight, but again, we've never really seen it on camera, so that'd be pretty cool one day. Hopefully we'll be able to do that. And then our largest whale that we have is going to be our blue whale. Again, they are the largest animal in the whole entire world, and they believe it's the largest animal to have ever existed, period. So if you're looking at an Antarctic one, they can grow up to almost 100 feet long. And again, they're going to be found all over the world. They're pretty famous for migrating. But when I say 100 feet, it's kind of hard to picture. So if we had a blue whale who's full grown, usually they can be about the size of 3 school buses lined up together. Depending on where they're from, maybe 2 school buses. They might be a little bit of a smaller species, but they can grow up to 3 school buses long. And then their heart can equal about the size of a small golf cart. The heart alone is going to weigh about 400 pounds. So if we think about it, a human heart is probably about the size of our fist. Their heart is the size of a small golf cart, which is very impressive. So their heart is doing a lot of work to take care of a body that's big. So they believe that if a human, not that we ever would, but a human could swim through the arteries of a whale, because that's how wide or big they are. So that's pretty crazy to think about how large this animal actually is. And then final whale I want to point out is going to be the North Atlantic right whale. Some of us have probably never even heard of this one before, but right now they are one of the rarest whales to find. So they are going to be over here in the Atlantic Ocean, so over on the other coast of Florida. They don't have quite as large of a range, but they are one of the most endangered whales right now. So if you kind of look at this chart we have here, they are considered to be critically endangered. So the next step up from that is extinct in the wilds. These whales aren't in any aquarium, so at that point they would be considered extinct. So it's kind of crazy to think about. But they get that name right whale because back when whaling was really, really big, sailors said that these were the right whale to hunt because they like to hang out really close to the surface, like you can see in the photo. So they were really easy for them to catch. So unfortunately, they think there's only about 300 of them left right now. So that's going to bring us to some threats that these animals face. They are really big animals, but even though they are big, there are still some things that they have to worry about. So our first one are going to be boats. These whales, they're going to be swimming in the open ocean where we have a lot of large vessels that are moving through. These boats have some big propellers that when they move fast, they can get pretty sharp. And boats are also going to be noisy, so sometimes that noise can also bother our whales. This one is going to be caught in some fishing line. So unfortunately, if that happens, whales, they don't have hands and fingers like we do, so they can't get themselves out of it. So sometimes they can be trapped in that fishing line. If no one ever sees them, they can be trapped in it for a really long period of time. And another threat, which happens to all animals in the ocean, is going to be trash or plastic pollution. So a lot of times if a whale washes up on shore and they look inside the stomach, they find a lot of plastic bags, plastic water bottles, bottle caps, anything you can think of, they have probably found it inside of their stomach. But even though this all sounds scary, there are still things we can do to help. We can do some beach cleanup, so you can grab your friends together, you can go out, make sure you're just doing it safely. You can also recycle, it's my favorite, getting rid of our plastic properly. And then we can also use reusable products, right? So if a lot of us, when we go to school, if we bring a reusable water bottle, just keep filling it up throughout the day, we're not wasting all that plastic. Reusable straws are a good one. We also have in like the bottom corner, you can see those little silicone bags. So instead of using plastic sandwich bags, we can use those. I use those every day for work. We can use reusable shopping bags. Another thing we can do that we can help is to learn more about these animals in the first place, right? The more we know about an animal, the better we can take care of them. If we tell our friends and our families and we make them more aware of these animals in the first place, that's going to start to make a big difference. Does anyone have any questions?
Hi, Caitlin. Actually, there are 2 questions. The first question is how do you tell how old a whale is?
That is a great question. So it depends on the type of whale. When we talked about our toothed whales, we can tell by looking at their teeth. So a lot of times the teeth will have little rings on them, kind of like a tree, how they have rings, we count them, that's how old they are. So for toothed whales, that's going to be the easiest way. For baleen whales, again, they don't have teeth. So they found that they count their earwax. They found that their earwax in their ears about every year or two counts as a new ring. So they look at their earwax, which is kind of gross, but that's how we can use them the best.
And the next question is, what's the oldest documented whale that's ever been found?
The oldest documented whale that's ever been found. I know the species was a bowhead whale. They are typically in the Arctic. I don't know the exact age, but they estimated up to 200 years would be how old they get. But I'm not sure like which one was documented as the oldest, but the bowhead whale can get the oldest. They think about 200 in the Arctic, which is kind of cool because they live near like where Greenland sharks live, and I think those sharks can get like 250 years old. So something in the Arctic waters just makes things live longer, I guess. But they think it's the bowhead whale.
And you mentioned earlier, somebody said that they wanted to know the difference again between dolphins, sharks, and yeah, it's like they want to know that you mentioned that dolphins are not sharks or whales, but could be.
So when it comes to dolphins and sharks, they're just going to be in completely different groups. So sharks are going to be a fish. So they breathe with their gills. They are going to like live entirely in the water. If you also look at how they move, sharks, their tails move kind of side to side. For our dolphins, they're going to be mammals like us, so they're going to breathe air. So they have a nostril and they don't have gills at all. If you look at how they move, their tails go up and down. So if you're ever at the beach and you see a fin sticking out of the water, if you look at the movement of where the tail is going, you can tell if it's a dolphin or a whale, because they both have fins, but.
Okay, and that was it for our questions.
All right, awesome. Thank you everybody for submitting those questions. I do want to invite our attendees to continue the experience here and check out these books. So we have Whales to the Rescue by Adrian Mason, and it discusses how whales are ecosystem engineers, animals that create, modify, or maintain a habitat or ecosystem. And we have another book, Big Whale, Small World by Mark Laren Young. And this is a great book for younger kids. It has rhyming text and features more whales from all around the world. Both books are available instantly through the Hoopla app. And with Hoopla, there's never any wait. You can always get the book right away.
And if you'd like any more information on anything that the library is presenting, or if you have questions for Caitlin, first of all, you can contact us at hcplc.org/contact. And we can also be reached at 813-273-3652. The Florida Aquarium, FLAquarium.org is their contact information. And check out more library programs and events at hcplc.org/events.
I want to thank everybody for joining us today, and a big thank you to Caitlin for teaching us all that information. I know I learned a lot. If people want to go check out more information about whales in the aquarium, check out their website. Thank you for joining us, and we hope to see you all soon. Good night, everybody.
Bye.
Thank
Bye.
you.